וכי נפשי אס השם
We are page 103, 5 lines from the top of the page. You noticed today my tie, and you heard last night the big Ravens winning in Denver, and I assume you watch how Ray Lewis bowed down the floor and said there is God, right? Anyway, and everyone has the purple here yesterday and today, so we're all in the spirit of fun. Anyway, page 103, 5 lines from the top of the page. Some background for those who are not here in the previous classes. We talk about a new entity on Shabbat, which is some type of a labor, but it's in that sense, the labor, it's not a regular type of labor, it's a derivative labor. An example, we talk about building or someone who's makeba patish. Makeba patish is like striking a blow with a hammer. And we explained that doesn't mean someone take a hammer and stick it. It means anytime you complete something that was done earlier, either by you or by someone else, you're basically creating the final stage of labor. And we said another important rule, that principle apply in Shabbat. The principles of Shabbat are extremely different than the principles of the law of, for example, damage. The law of damage and damagee, if you have Mr. A damage Mr. B, we go by the consequences, which means we go by the final result, what exactly happened to Mr. B. In Shabbat, we go a very different direction. We go to the mindset of the person, which means what we care is what the person who did something have in his mind. An example, if a person took an item in a private domain and throw it to a public domain, but for example he wasn't realized that it's Shabbat, didn't realize that today someone just screamed at him and said today is Shabbat, so he's not liable because he is not just shogeg. He does not have, in order to be liable even for sin offering, for an unwittingly act, you need to have the full process, which is uplifting the item while you have in your mind that it's Shabbat and completing it. Then it's called mezid, intentionally. Or you have unintentional when you lift up the item, and until that item rested in a different domain, you are always in the whole process in a state of unintention. But since the key point of all of that is what do you have in your machshava, what you have in your thought, in your mind, Shabbat is a very different entities than other entities. So, for example, if someone throw an item on an animal or on a person and created damage to that person, he may be exempt as far as the Shabbat is concerned. He may be liable in the law of damaging. Why? Because again, Shabbat and other entities are different. Shabbat will go solely by what the person have in his mind. So now we go to Ze HaKlal, 5 lines from the top of the page. Ze HaKlal la'ato yemai la'ato yidecha kefi za bekaba. We learn this principle. Anyone who perform a prohibited labor and his labor indoors on Shabbat is liable. So what is the example is when one carved out a vessel with a capacity of a half a cub, which means that it's a relatively small capacity, but he put it in a piece of wood in which it was possible to chisel a vessel with the capacity of a cub. So since that labor endures on Shabbat, it can be used and it's considered a complete labor and is liable. So an example, when you have a building, so you have an idea of boneh, someone who really build a building, and you have mesatet. Example, Rabban Shimon Gamliel Omer Hamakeh bekrunas al hasadan. He said that someone who strike a navel with a sledgehammer is already liable. My kavid, what exactly he did? So Rabba v'Rabbi Yosef dan Metravam mipnei sheme'amen et yado, because what happened is what he done by striking the navel will render him liable. So he said, because his hand, he trained his hand to for his work by striking an avel. So by doing it constantly, he became so skilled. So that's the issue. Kashu b'nei Barachava, the sons of a great sage by the name of Rachava, it's several places in the Talmud, and they said, what exactly the issue? If so, one who observe a craft being performed on Shabbat and learn to perform that craft through observation. So you tell me it's also liable? So again, let's go to the mindset. The whole cause of idea of Shabbat come from the tabernacle. The Jewish people wandering in the desert, and it was a building of a tabernacle, and it was a 39 type of work involved with that action. So he said the people who involved at that time in the tabernacle, people who flattened plates of metal for the tabernacle used to do is, so they will strike an avel with a sledgehammer in order to straighten the sledgehammer handle, which become crooked. So therefore, that's the way that we derive it to us. Even one who striking a veil with a sledgehammer doing the labor is liable. Doing his labor is basically liable. Why? And again, those who flatten plates of metal in the tabernacle used to do it. Now is the Mishnah. Now, as we said in the introduction, in this parak, in this chapter, we're dealing with three types of melachot. We dealt already with melacha of boneh, which is the builder, and then we go on the second one, which is plowing, and the writing. So now we're going to the second category, which is plowing. Ha-choresh kolshu. The Mishnah said, if someone plows in any amount, is liable. Is considered what? Plow. Thank you. So it says loud. Don't be shy. It's a lot of area I need to improve. Yes, one who plows is liable for plowing any amount of land on Shabbat. המנקש והמקרסם והמזרד כלשהו חייב. One who weeds and remove grass on Shabbat, and one who removes dry branches, and one who prunes any amount is liable. So they said, אם לתקן כלשהם. If he gathered the wood, if he did those to enhance the tree or the land, he is liable of any amount. If lehesek, if he did it for fuel, is liable for what? כדי לבשל ביצה קלה, collecting a measure equivalent to what's used to cook and easily cook egg in those days especially, but nowadays also you see a different size of egg and different process of cooking it. They are basically chicken egg, small hen egg, that it's easy to cook, versus if you take duck or other eggs, it's harder. So they said here, melaket asavim, you go by the very basics, it's already considering a melacha, a work. One who gathered a grass, so im letaken kolshu, if to enhance the plants of the land, so he's liable of any amount, kolshu. Im labema kem lo pliagde, but however, if he needs it to feed an animal, so that's different only in the goat mouthful, because you can go in that sense with go with the average, and it's also the liability is from kotzer. It's not because of plowing. Why use the goat? Because the goat is the smallest animal that eats grass, in the smallest size of animal that eating grass. So therefore,
so why wouldn't they just say any amount?
If you say any amount and you imply to a goat, it's a good question. I don't know. I think that it's just to use something that's more practical. That people are more familiar, because the goat is the smallest one. But it's a good point. Anyway, GEMARA. So the GEMARA asks, Lemai chazi. What use is a plowing any amount of land suited? So they say chaze leveizra dekara. They suited for a single pumpkin seed. Soon we go to that season, right? Again, everything corresponding to the tabernacle. What do? They do a single stalk of herbs to make dyes. Hamenakesh ve'amekarsem ve'amezareg. Who said that one who weeds, one who removes dry branches, one who prunes any amount is liable. Tanu Rabbanan, the sages told us, Hatolesh olashim, if someone who severs dives, אם לאכילה כגרוגרת, if that he needed for such a small amount like grogeret, very very small. So אם לבהמה כמו פלי הגדי, if it's for the animal, we said again, is a side of the equivalent to a goat mouthful. אם להסק, if you need it for fuel, it's the severed matter כדי לבשל ביצה קלה, in order to use a easily cooked egg. אם לייפות את הקרקע, if you needed to enhance the land, so then enhancing the land, it's any amount, כלשהו, any amount. So the Gemara asked, to כולו לא לייפות את הקרקע נינו? All of them is basically making, enhancing the land. So the Gemara answered and they said, Rabba v'Rav Yosef, the Amreit Ravayu, we have here both Rabba and Rav Yosef, that both of them said, Be'agam shanu, they said in regard to the swampland, where grass is not uprooted to enhance the land, that's what they meant. He says, no, it's not necessarily a swampland. It can be a regular one, but as long as he's not having his intent to do it. Remember, I repeat myself, the key in Shabbat is the intent. There is a very important concept in halacha, in Hilchot Shabbat, that's called psik reishav lo yamut. You're cutting, literally meaning you're cutting the chicken head. So some chicken even run for a short period of time without the head. But by cutting the head, eventually they will die. So in that sense, they use that metaphor for Shabbat, that they said that one who holds is liable for only performing an intentional action, concede that one is liable in a case of cut off his head and will not die. So in other words, in any case where the outcome is inevitable, as in the case where the land that will be enhanced, one's lack of intention does not exempt him. So the Gemara answered and they said, it means that these cases speak about his somebody else, like his friend, somebody else's land. So he's not intend the outcome to eventuate what he drive, no benefit from enhancing the land, so you don't holding liability. So let's wrap it up in a very clear manner. The idea of liability apply to having the full intent that involved with the entire process. So I'm now going to exaggerate just to give you an idea how clearly and how extremely it is. If someone in a one domain, such as for example private domain, and he is throwing an item to a public domain, and while he did it on the process, even 3 seconds before it's landed on the public domain, someone told him, it's Shabbat, you can't do that, it's a type of work of carrying. So the moment he realized that, he's exempt. Why? Because in order to have him bringing at that time a sin offering, you need to have the state of mind such as unknowledge, unwittingness, unawareness for the entire time from the beginning of the process at a very complete type of process. So now the Mishnah go further to the next step. They said, let's talk about writing, because this is one of the 39 type of work. Hakotev shte otiyot. If someone is writing 2 letters on Shabbat, makes no difference.
Rabbi, how do you define improve the land? If they do something to improve the land, is that in any sense?
Any sense.
It's from an agricultural standpoint, from an ornamental standpoint. So how do they derive that from the 39 categories of work? Because
that's what they did in the tabernacle. They used to do it as part of their preparations. Number one, if you look at the process, they make those, such as we just use example of dyeing, coloring and doing things. It was a part of making it in the process of enhancing it. It's in one entity and it turned to a different entities. So by doing so, they're basically enhancing that item. But it can happen in many other cases, that you basically enhance the situation. You know that in Shabbat we juxtapose from the tabernacle to a lot of other things. So for example, I give you another example. If you're watering the grass, okay, you may say that you're not planting a seed, which is melechet zorea, planting a seed. But by just watering the grass, its derivative, it's called tolada, it's a consequence that the seed that already planted there, maybe long ago, enhance themselves.
So what you're saying is, because during the creation of the tabernacle, they improved the materials to create the tabernacle, and that fundamental concept of they stopped doing this work, therefore they stopped improving the materials that they created, which would ultimately become the tabernacle. Therefore, the rabbis derive from that you can't improve anything during Shabbat, with the exception of food. Am I right?
Food,
about that?
or something that you need for saving life, or something that you need for, for the, something that it relates to an immediate need of Shabbat. But again, in a very general sense, yes. Because the whole concept of 39 is the derivative. It's called whatever, it's in a tabernacle, and also it's important. Something that makes a difference. Change the status. Okay. So, for example, nowadays, you have this Tzomet Institute in Israel that they invented for big agricultural places or companies worldwide. They have a machine that running in a certain Shabbat clock and a special process of time, that it's basically running by itself and watering whatever needed. If you have, whatever agriculture can be, from flowers to grass to fruits to whatever it is, you grow vegetables and you need to water them sometimes twice a day. So you can have those machines that set up with a certain timer, and therefore it's running by itself.
But if the intent is, so how do the rabbis derive the exception? So if ahead of Shabbat, you go ahead and you create a timer situation where something is going to, something is going to occur during Shabbat.
Yeah, but you set it up in advance.
And you set it up in advance.
So it's running by itself.
It's running by itself, but still, the intent is, if we're talking about intent,
yeah, but the intent wasn't in Shabbat.
But the intent, though, is to do it during Shabbat.
Excellent point. So, Brian, here is the difference. If you talk about me telling a non-Jew on Shabbat something to do for me, that's forbidden. Okay? But if I pre-plant before Shabbat that watering the grass and I set up the timer is not an entity in that sense. It's running because of my instruction, but my instruction, the mindset, the plan was set up in advance before Shabbat. So in other words, if I tell a non-Jew before Shabbat to do work for me on Shabbat, as long as the non-Jew derives something for himself, a benefit for himself, he do something for himself, then I can derive joy from that. But as long as it was set up in advance in such instruction, again, here when you talk about a plowing, so it has to set up in advance. Mishnah, hakotev shte otiyot. If someone writes 2 letters, regardless, ben mimino, ben mismolo, regardless if you use the right hand or the left hand, ben mishem echad, ben mishtem shemot, really he used he did it with 2 different type of letters, ben mishtei samaniot, 2 different type of ink, bechol lashon, in any language, chayav, he is liable. It makes no difference. Amar Rabbi Yossi lo chivu shti otiyot lo mishum roshem. Rabbi Yossi said that one deemed liable for writing 2 letters only due to marking. Is they write symbols on for example, they used to do it in the beams in the tabernacles. So which beam is a counterpart, etc. Like you go to Home Depot or IKEA, you see a sign on those items before you open it, and you see in each beam signal what to do. So that's the idea. To know which one is matching the counterpart with the other beam. How about if you have a longer name or smaller name? So he said, Shem Katan, Shem Mishimon. The word Shem, it's a name, but it's also part of the word Shimon or Mishmuel. Part of the Shmuel is Shin Mem. Noach, Minachor, Noah from Nachor. Dan, Midaniel, from Daniel. Gad, Migadiel. So you see, all of these cases, the first 2 letters of the longer name constitute the shorter, the abbreviated part of name. In our country, you see it a lot of time that people do abbreviation for names. So since most of the people using the right hand, so you say that, okay, so let him be liable. משום דרך כתיבה בכך, because that's the manner of people writing. אלא השמאל המאי, but if someone is writing on the left, especially if someone is not a lefty, so what's the reason he is liable? אמר רבי ירמיה, בהיתר יד שנו. No, we're talking here about President Obama, or someone like that, that using what? Left-handed, right? So they said, have a small liday ki yamin likule alma. So if that's the case, let the person who is a left hand have the same legal status as everyone's right hand, right? Ve'asmol lichayev, for writing with his left hand. So let him be liable. Ayamin lo mechayev, for writing with his right hand, let him not be liable. Here we're speaking about a person, how you call it in English? There's a special word, that person that uses both hands.
Ambidextrous.
Thank you, ambidextrous. That person was liable for writing in either hands. Rav Yaakov brother Rav Bat Yaakov Amar. So Rav Yaakov, the son of daughter of Yaakov, and the rabbis explained why we're using the mother's name here, and they said that it's because the father wasn't a competent person, and therefore they don't mention his name. That's what Rashi said. So anyway, he said, "Hamani Rabbi Yossi." These statements come from Rabbi Yossi. The Amar lo chivu shte otiyot ela mishum roshem. The idea is that because it's due to marking, that's the idea of having liability. V'hamid sefer Rabbi Yossi reish alav Rabbi Yossi kula Rabbi Yossi. So how come you learn it just from the first clause and not from the second? So said it has to be that the whole both statement from Rabbi Yossi only use it twice to emphasize, like many teachers does all the time. They repeats themselves to emphasize and clarify. So Rabbi Yehuda said, we found one who's liable for writing even if he did not complete what he's writing. So that he wrote small name constitute part of the longer name. אלא רבי יהודה שתי אותיות ואין שתי שמות הוא מחייב, שתי אותיות ואין שם אחד לא מחייב. So why you tell me that two letters of two different types of letters is liable, but two letters of one type it's not liable? והתניא ועשה אחת, the Torah said clearly in the Leviticus 4, they said, when a leader sinned and he unwittingly performed one of many commandments which God commanded not to do, he is guilty. So they said, יכול להיות שיכתוב כל השם. Maybe you mind to say that he write the entire name, so ועד שירוק כל הבגד, or until he weaves the entire garment, ועד שיעשה כל הנפה, or until he crafts the entire sieve, made for the reeds, for wrap of the woof. So they said, Talmud lomar me'achad, so that's the reason why the Torah said specifically, me'achad, from one of these. So the GEMARA asks, im me'achad, if you tell me from one of these, יכול אפילו כתב לו אות אחת, maybe he just wrote one letter. Yes.
So, isn't the process of creating and improving something enough to say you can't write? Why do you have to go into all this detail?
Because you need to say that, excellent point, that when you're writing one letter, right, one letter, it's basically, you don't have a clear consequence. You need, for example, to write abbreviation of name, to write Shem out of Shmuel or Shimon. But if you're writing just Shin, in that sense, no one knows when you put it on a beam what's the counterpart and what you need for. So you need to create an entity, for example, Shem from Shmuel, Gad migadiel. You need these two letters to make it happen. So velo harag el achut echad, or for example, even one wove only one single thread. Velo asa el abayit echad ben afai, created only single eye of sieve. So arranging the reed to create a wrap and then intertwining in a single reed or as a woof. So maybe he's not liable at all. So turn the page. We said in the 103p, it said Talmud lomar achat. So the first states one, which means one complete labor. So hakitzad, how you do it? Eino chayav shichtov shem katan vishem gadol. He is liable only he writes a small name from the big one. Shem mishimon. The letter Shem from the word Shimon, Umishmuel, Noach minachor, Dan min Daniel, Gad min Gadiel. In other words, is part of the entire name. Rabbi Yehuda אומר, אפילו לא כתב אלא שתי אותיות והם שם אחד, כגון שש, תת, רר, גג, חך, all these things, meaning he wrote only two letters, that one type of letter. אמר רבי יוסי, וכי משום כותב הוא חייב, is liable due to the writings, ועלון אחריו משום רושם, the only thing is a marking. שכן רושמים על קרשי המשנה, נדע איזו בין ואין זוגו. Always we go by the tabernacles, they write on the beam to know what is the counterpart. לפיכת שרה שריטה על שתי נסרים. Therefore, if one made a single scratch on two boards, או שתי סרטות על מסר אחד חייב, או two scratches on a single board is liable. רבי שמעון אומר ועשה אחת, יכול שכתוב את כל השם. Maybe he meant to say that the entire name, עד שיראו את כל הבלט שעושה כל המפת, הוא אומר מאחת. So the same thing, אם מאחת יכול אפילו כתב לו אחות אחת, maybe only one letter, ואפילו לא הרגל אחוד אחד, ואפילו עשה לבית אחת בנפת, אמרו לומר אחת, הכיצד, אינו חייב שעושה ואחת שעושה והמתקיימת. But we explain that one is only liable performing a labor that is of a type that endorse, that they consider a complete labor. רבי יוסי אומר ועשה אחת ועשה אינה פעמים שחייב אחת על כולם פעמים שחייב על כל אחת ואחת. He said because the Torah said specifically in Leviticus 4 and did an action from one of these, it means that can be one perform all of this and he is liable, or one did just one of them to bring, and you need to bring for one of them, each and every one of them, a separate sin offering. Yes?
Is there a distinction in the degree of liability between marking and writing?
Marking and writing different liability. In that sense, in our discussion, yes, because the marking it create more formulation of name.
So which would be a more severe degree of liability, writing or marking?
So this is part of our discussion. We said so far, as long as it's not completion of name, you don't do it in the full. So basically, at least in our stage so far, we don't have a liability. So we said that the GEMARA returned to the Braita, and they said it's not a question. Why? Because this is the word of Rabbi Yehuda. That means that he hold that that's the way Rabbi Yehuda said. Sometimes it's him, and that's sometimes it's Rabbi. So let me make sure that we are all the same page, because we skip here. Again, קטן מיה רבי יהודה אומר, אפילו לא כתב אלא שתי אותיות והם שם אחד חייב. So we say that one is liable if only he wrote two letters that are one type of letter, which means that he does not insist that one is liable if he writes two different letters. So it means from the big letter, two letters he wrote. So the GEMARA said, no, lo kashya, this is not difficult. You know why? The idea is, hadidei haderabei. One point it's of himself, and one what he learned from his teacher. The Tanya Rabbi Yehuda Omer Mishum Rabban Gamliel. That's what Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rabban Gamliel. Afilu lo katav ela shte otiyot. If he only wrote only two letters, then shem echad, which means that it's two letters from one words that he meant to write, chayav. So vem shem echad chayav. Kegon, here is example. Take the Hebrew word shesh. Shesh literally means six, but if you see it many times, the word shesh in Hebrew can have other meanings. You see it in several places in the Tanakh. Tet, rar, gag, chach, gag, it means roof, etc. So it means that Rabbi Yehuda in the Braita, the previous Braita, it's not just his word, but that's the opinion of Rabban Gamliel. So now we ask Rabbi Shimon, Hainu Tanakama. Rabbi Shimon hold that one is not liable for any type of work, only if that work has some outcome. So he said, so if someone wrote a word, for example, the word Shem, so from the big word like Shimon, so it's part of the big word that he meant. So he should be liable, even letters like shesh or tat. V'chi teima aleph da'azercha ika benayu, which means you have a word that in Isaiah that said a'azercha, aleph zayin reish chav sofit. So this, it means I tighten you, like tightening a belt. So the Tana Kama Savar, the first Tana hold, Aleph, Da'azercha lo michayev, that it means Aleph, it's two letters from a big word. So therefore, it's not a word by himself that in any place in the Tanakh that they have Aleph. You don't have in any place in the Tanakh. So therefore, it's not a full words, even that is a 2 letters. ורבי שמעון סבר, כיוון דאיתי בגלתורי חייב. We explained many times that people sometimes, especially in ancient days, they use amulet. They use amulets to write on that parchment a certain biblical words, and they put it for guardians, for other purposes. So people who wrote those kameot, those they use certain words that not necessarily carry a meaning. They use a certain numerical value, a certain words. A good example, for those who study Jewish history, they know that Rabbi Avraham Abulafia of the 11th century, he was expert in the Torah Tzerufim, in a combination of letters and words. And sometimes when you see those amulets, as far as the words meaning, it's not necessarily a meaning of word, it's the combination and the secret of those combinations. That's, by the way, the Rashi said. And the Tosfot also, in Dibur HaMatchil Begalan Torah, he's also said that something, or he gave an example. You see in the Sidur, Amen, Amen, Sela, the writing in the Kme'in, in those, that it's a numerical value. Anyway, so according to Rabbi Shimon, it's enough that these 2 letters, it's written as one word in those amulet, even they don't carry any meaning. It's already liable for writing it. Lemeimra, it means Rabbi Shimon lechuma, that Rabbi Shimon it's much stringent, which means he make a person liable even by the letters that doesn't carry any meaning. Ve'atanya, however, we saw in a different braita, hakodeach kol shehu chayav. If one would drill a hole of any side on Shabbat, he's liable. Hamgarer kol shehu ve'ame'abed kol shehu ve'atzad b'chli shua kol shehu. All of this is liable, which means one who scrape and smooth paths or parchment in any amount, or one who tends any amount of animal hide, or one who draws any size of the vessel. All of that is liable. So now you see the opposite. What happened here? Rabbi Shimon omer ad sheikdach kulo v'ad sheigror kulo v'ad she'abed kulo v'ad she'atzud kulo. No, Rabbi Shimon says no. He's liable only if the first example, he drilled the entire hole that he intended to drill. He scraped the post parchment entirely. He tanned the entire hide. He draws the entire form, which means that Rabbi Shimon is lenient. He says as long as he's not completed everything, it's not considering type of labor. So now it means that according to Rabbi Shimon, even a type of labor of writings, a person is not liable only if he wrote entirely the word that he intended to write. Ela, you must say, Rabbi Shimon ha'ata la'ashmuinan, Rabbi Shimon come and teach us what? Ad sheyichtov et Hashem kulo, until he writes the entire name that he intended originally. So it means that what he said in the first braita and the second braita is the same, that he is not liable until he completes the entire work that he intended to do it originally in his mind. So therefore, if he is a come of writing, and he meant to write a longer words, and he wrote only 2 letters, so Rabbi Shimon is much lenient in that sense. So the GEMARA said, how you go in that way? Tanya, we learn in a braita, Rabbi Shimon omer v'asa achat, we just said that shows that if the Nasi committed one of those things, one, יכול להיות שיכתוב את השם כולו, maybe it applies that he wrote the entire words, the entire name. So they said no, it means Talmud lomar me'achat. By saying the word me'achat in the Torah, it means that he is liable even he didn't wrote the entire words that he intends to, which means he is not liable for writing less a complete word. So it means taretz ve'amar achi. So the GEMARA come and said, you know what? It means יכול להיות שיכתוב את הפסוק כולו, תלמוד לומר מאחד. The same idea that maybe it's applied that the entire verse, that he wrote the entire pasuk. So they said no, we learn from one me'achad that is liable until he writes the entire word, which means the Shem that you have in Shimon, entire. You have to have the entire. So, so it means that we have 4 opinions as far as writing 2 letters from a full word. Number 1, we have the Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah tells us that a person is liable even he wrote 2 different words. Then you have Rabbi Yehuda in the name of his Rebbe, which is Rabban Gamliel, that hold even that is equal 2 letters that they carry a meaning. Then you have the Rabbi Yossi, third opinion, which is that it's because of his Roshem, which means that he is really in a state of composing writings, so he is liable for writing 2 letters, even they carry no meaning, like Aleph Aleph. And then Rabbi Shimon, that he said, is not liable until he completed the word that he intended to do. So you see here that what the Tosfot said as well, that as long as he's, according to Rabbi Shimon, is not liable until he's finished the entire line. So now we go to the last part of the Braita. Rabbi Yossi אומר ועשה אחת ועשה הנה פעמים שכב אחד על כולם ופעמים שכב על כל אחד ואחד. Rabbi Yossi said that when we use this pasuk, this unusual expression, that it means that when he did 1 and he did 3, so we said at times one is liable to bring 1 sin offering for them all, and at times liable to bring several offerings for each and every one. As now explaining. אמר רבי יוסי ברבי חנינא מה איתמר רבי יוסי אחת מאחת הנה מהנה אחת שהיא הנה והנה שהיא אחת. So he explained what's the idea of achat mehena. So he said that sometimes achat mehena, meaning 1 from 1, or the 1 is not from 1, which means it's not sufficient to say this instead of these. So the idea that you have a repetition of the language is teach us that the case 1 of that is this, and cases of this that are 1, which means that it has to be 1 in 1 transgression, and he has a sin offering for all of them. Achat me'achat Shimon me'achat Shemi Shimon. So he explained when we use the verse 1 achat, so it means writing the name Shimon on Shabbat. That's 1. So 1 is only liable for performing a complete sin. From 1 teaches that 1 liable even it does not complete, which means writing Shem, Me'achad Shem mi Shimon. He intends to write Shimon and he writes just the letter Shem. Hena Avot, the second one. When we use the primary category from these, it means we have the category of labor. This is a category of labor. Mehena, from this we derive the subcategory of which is toladot. And he said, achat she hena, b'zdon shada shavar v'shigrat melachot, which means 1 that was aware that he was in violation of the prohibition of Shabbat, but not aware that the individual labors are prohibited. So here they said the same. These are the one who refer that one is unaware that he is in violation Shabbat, but he was not aware that the individual labors were prohibited. So after we complete all these discussions, so now the Gemara returned to the point of Rabbi Yehuda, and they said, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, matzinu shem katan mishem gadol. We found small, like Shem from Shimon, part of that. So the first 2 letters of Shimon is Shin and Mem. So it means Midami. So the Gemara asks, is that compare? Is that similar? They said Mem the Shem Satum, Mem the Shimon Patuach. If you look at the Hebrew letter of Shimon, Shin Mem Ayin Vav Nun Sofit. The Mem is the second letter, and it's open mem, it's not the final mem. Versus with the word Shem, like one of the biblical name, it's Shin and Mem Sofit. So now they said, how do you compare it? One is open, one is closed. So it means that it's different. So why he's liable? אמר רב חיסדא, זאת אומרת, סתום ועשאו פתוח כשר. If there is a letter that it was closed letter, and one rendered it open, is valid even in writing a Torah scroll. And it's not considered it's something that it's wrong in the writing. So it means, if you wrote in a Sefer Torah the word Shin Mem with open Mem, right? Even he's supposed to say it Shin Mem with Mem Sofit, b'diavad, not lechatchila, b'diavad, the Sefer Torah is kosher. Which means that the word Shem from Shimon, even Shem, is written with Mem that it's Mem Sofit, different than Shimon, the Shin Mem that is open, that it's letters that can be independent letter. So now we go, the next part of our discussion, we're going to talk about a Otiyot Sefer Torah, writing in a Sefer Torah. Now here's the Meitivei. In regards to writing tefillin and mezuzot, is Deuteronomy chapter 6. So the Torah said, Uchtav tam, you should write, Shetehek tiva tama, which means you need to write the entire letter properly. Meaning, Shelo yichtov alfin einin, or einin alfin, when you can hear the word aleph and ayin, sometimes very similar. So a person cannot write something that's supposed to be with ayin with aleph, or aleph with ayin. Baiting, kafin, baiting. We see the letter bet and letter kaf, they are very close, very similar. The scribe should be careful not to mix them and should write it clearly. Or gimel, tzadik, tzadik, gimel. The exchange between gimel and tzadik sometimes look very similar. Daltin, reishin, dalting. The dalet and the reish are very similar, so sometimes they mix. Hey, chaitin, hein. The chet and hey in Hebrew, they're very close to each other. Vavin, yudin, vavin. The letter yud and letter vav are very similar, so again, it's a mixing. Zaining, nuning, zaining. Again, that it means that he shouldn't make that leg of that zain like nun, the Ritva said, or make it the opposite way, which means you have to be very careful because those are very, very similar letter. Tating, paping, tating, which means the letter pay like tet, letter tet like pay. So the Ramban, Rashba, Ritva, all these Meforshim explain that the right side of the head of the tet, it's coming down. So therefore, it's very similar to pay, and so people can mix between them. Maiming samechin, the letter mem is very similar to samech, samechin meimin. Again, it's very similar, so people can mix between them. Stumim ptuchim, ptuchim stumim, which means that sometimes you write something that it looks open, and it's closed, and the close it's open. So he said, all of that, what we learned that when he writes this, the scribe have to be very careful, because otherwise it can be misconstrued easily by people.
One quick question on this tangent. It mentions in the footnote that a Torah.
I don't have your footnote. Okay.
Oh, okay. In the footnote that I have here, it mentions in the Torah scroll, if an error is found, a letter can be erased and the proper letter put in. So
it's not preferable and it's not advisable, but it's possible.
But it says further to say that tefillin and mezuzah scrolls, you can't fix them like that if a letter was made in error. They have to be put in order. So that, I'm just curious about the question then. What if a tefillin scroll goes bad, a piece of the letter falls off later, due to age or whatever? Can it be repaired, or does it have to be replaced?
You go to a scribe,
okay,
which everybody here, I always send them to Ner Israeli Shiva in Baltimore, and usually what happens is the scribe replaced them with a new parchment.
Okay, you can't put a Torah scroll, though. I know you can repair.
I know that some people said, I have this feeling since my bar mitzvah and things like that. Look.
Or my grandfather's tefillin.
Yes,
right.
Yes. It's very emotional, collective ideas. But as far as fulfilling the halacha, tefillin need to be checked. Some said every 7 years, some said every couple of years. The point is tefillin that, especially if it wasn't for use for so many years, it has to be checked by a scribe, and most of the time, it needs to replace either by the new pair of tefillin or at least the new parchment inside those tefillin.
Okay, thank you.
Final halacha. Today we learn a lot of halachot. Number 1 is Rambam. Hilchot Shabbat chapter 8. The amount of plowing that one is liable, it's called shi'ur harisha. One who plows even the smallest amount on Shabbat is liable. So it means, for example, one who weeds and one who removes dry branches and one who prunes. So one who removes weed around the trunk of a tree, or one who uproots grass, or one who prunes branches on Shabbat in order to improve the land, he basically violates a subcategory of the prohibition of plowing, and is liable for any quantity of weeding, pruning, or removing branches. And the amount of severing or pruning, one who uproots, endives, or cuts the green shoots on Shabbat is liable. If the purpose is human consumption, then the legal measure for liability is the volume of a dry fig bark. If the purpose is for animal consumption, that's a different story. One is liable for amount who fill the kid's mouth, and we explained that that's the minimum amount, that the smallest size of animal is the kid. And if the purpose is to use the plants as fuel, one is liable if they are enough to cook a dry fig bark worth of a chicken egg, because that's the smallest egg to cook. If his action is meant to improve the ground, the individual is liable for even the smallest amount. That's the Maimonides, the Rambam, Hilchot Shabbat, chapter 8. Now, how about someone who's writing? So they said, one who wrote, the Rambam, Hilchot Shabbat, chapter 11, he said, one who writes 2 letters on Shabbat is liable whether there are 2 different letters, or the same letter written twice intentionally, or 2 letters written in any language or script, or written in 2 different types of ink or paint. Now, how about marking? One who creates 2 marks, sharp or sign, on Shabbat is liable for writing even if the character are not letters. That's what Rabbi Yossi said. Now, how about ktiva shelo kedaka? If someone writes in an atypical manner, which means one who writes a prohibited legal measure on Shabbat by holding the writing instrument in his mouth, for example, like they used to do it in ancient time, or in his left hand, or in any other unusual manner, is basically not liable. A left-handed person is liable for writing with his left hand, but he's not liable if he writes with his right hand. One who is used the both hands, how do you say this word? Using both hands?
Ambidextrous.
Thank you, ambidextrous. Is liable for writing with either hands. So, for example, our president, right, who's writing on his left hand, it's only applied to the left side because that's the strongest part. Shi'ur melachot, the amount of labor that needs to be performed. If one intends to perform a prohibited labor on Shabbat and does the legal measure for which one is liable, he is in fact liable even if he did not complete the prohibited labor he set out to perform. That's the Rambam, Hilchot Shabbat, the very beginning, the first chapter. Now, how about if one who writes 2 letters on Shabbat is liable even if they are identical letters, like we said, Aleph and Aleph. However, if one wrote 2 letters that cannot be combined to form an actual word, then he is not liable. That's Rabbi Yehuda. But basically the Mishnah here asks a question in chapter 11, because some of those who write kameot with the right amulet, and it's not carrying necessarily a meaning, but they writing it for other reasons, like a protection amulet they used in ancient time, or other purposes, guardian, whatever the amulet is, and they have numbers or hidden message which not necessarily the meaning of words. Anyway, so the Maggid Mishnah have a lot to say about it. How about Hame'abed, one who tends enough leather on Shabbat to fashion an amulet is liable. The GEMARA states that one is liable for tending only any quantity in order to express the fact that Rabbi Shimon's opinion should not be followed because he's extremely lenient. How about Hatzar Bechli Tzura Kol Shehu, one who forms any figure, even a partial one, on a vessel? He is liable for any primary category of labor of striking a blow with a hammer to complete the production process of a vessel. We explained many times that the makeh b'patish, the completion of work, it's the final process.
Final blow.
Yes. Now we talk about avot and toladot, category and subcategory. So we said one who performs an action that is a subcategory of primary category is liable just as if he had violated the primary category of labor. So, for example, the text of Torah scroll. So as you know, the text of Torah scroll must be perfect. That's Yoredea 274. Now, it cannot have no part missing from the letter. So the letter should also contain all the decorative crowns and other decorating features. So one should not write an aleph as a ayin. When writing a letter of Torah scroll, one must take care not to switch similar looking letters. However, the text is only invalid if the letter are in a way unreplaced. In other words, you stuck with that letter, so that's a problem. So, for example, if it's a parasha ptucha, if it's an open paragraph, so lo yasena stuma, you cannot render it close. The same one may not, nor may closed paragraph be written as an open one. If such an error was made, the scroll must be stored away and not used. The Rambam writes that such a Torah scroll is invalid and lacks the sanctity of a Torah, and is rather like a printed Torah book used to teach children. But some rabbis rules that one is permitted to repair such a scroll if possible. That's the Rosh and the Rashba, and that's the common practice. See Shulchan Aruch Yerodea 275. Now we said also that in all of that, that's part of a mitzvah tomorrow discussion, that when it's come to open and close paragraph, take for example the Parshat Vayechi, or that it's a closed paragraph, etc. So it's an issue, because that's part of the decorum, how you write the Sefer Torah. It has to be in such a decorum in order to make it be used. But again, the question of b'diavad, in some cases, if you're urgent need, if you are in Siberia and that's the only Torah you have, Torah scroll, and you cannot use any other Torahs, so there are those who said in those circumstances, as long as you read it and people hear it clearly, it maybe can use. But in very general term, those Sefer Torah should either repair, and if it's not unrepairable, should put in a geniza. And that's important comment that I'm always disturbed. I saw some shuls that they have Sefer Torah that it's no longer valid. They put it in the beautiful windows as a expression of beauty. I have an issue with that, because we're supposed to stand up when the Torah is open. We need to give a tremendous honor and decorum for the Sefer Torah. Yet even the Torah is no longer kosher. Just to put it in display outside and leave it like that, I feel, since I came to this country almost 2 decades, some type of a desecration of the value of Torah. And I knew that in traditional Judaism, we either keep the Torah in the ark, or we put the belt outside as a sign that we need to repair it, or in some cases we use it just to teach children, as the Rambam said, or put it in a geniza, and if needed we bury it. Geniza is a special pile of things that are no longer in use. We put it very respectfully with 2 wrapping covers, and then we bury it respectfully in a special gravesite that we plan for geniza items.
Hashem